we live?
All right, I think we're here.
Yeah.
Well, it is Friday, September 5th. Summer is, I suppose, behind us now, but the gains are all ahead. Welcome everybody. You are watching Capital Gains.
Nice.
Thank you for being here. My name is Julian Fahrer. I am here joined, as always, by Bitcoin Magazine political correspondent, fresh off a plane from somewhere on the other side of the world.
That's right.
But he's had a couple of coffees this morning. Doesn't know what time it is, but he is ready to go. Mr. Frank Corva.
Let's go. Yeah, getting my bearings about me here. This is sobering me up. Ready to go here. Let's rip.
Great. Well, Frank, you've had a big week. Last week you were in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Live from Bitcoin Asia. Well, just after Bitcoin Asia. We had a little bit of a chance to recap the conference and some of the things that were said and some of the takeaways and headlines that came out of it. But I think there's still more to say. So there's plenty to talk about on this episode, I suppose, on things stateside. We have some news on taxes on tips on Bitcoin, a couple of bills here and there, some new guidance, some more guidance on debanking. And the congressional session is going to kick back into gear soon enough and get Clarity Act rolling again. But before we get into any of that, let us talk about a little bit more about what happened in Asia last week.
Yeah. So quick overview. We had the Bitcoin Asia 2025 over in Hong Kong. We talked about that last week. I actually came to you from the hotel room right after the conference concluded. One of the reasons I thought to maybe bring it up again today to talk about it was I could back up a little bit there if it's
That's all right.
if we need. Yeah,
don't mind me. Just doing some editing
Let's
on
go.
the fly.
Let's go. So yeah, Bitcoin Asia. Super interesting, but I also had the privilege of attending the Metaplanet shareholder meeting in Tokyo. So Bitcoin Asia concluded on Friday. Metaplanet shareholder meeting was on Monday. Eric Trump spoke at both of them. So it was sort of interesting to see him speak at both of these things. Obviously, this is the president's son speaking at these massive events. So for those who don't know, Metaplanet is sort of, I don't know, almost sort of like approaching level of like religious revival in Japan. There was 3,000 people in the main room at the event, and then there were 2 overflow rooms. So there were people showing up to a shareholder meeting in overflow, watching the meeting on screens next door. So it's quite intense to see up close. Metaplanet has surely made Bitcoin seem legitimate in the eyes of most Japanese people, I think, in terms of it being an investable asset. And I say that more broadly, not just people there, because I did ask some of my quote unquote normie friends if they knew what Metaplanet was and what it does, and they do. So Metaplanet, for those who don't know, is the premier Bitcoin treasury company in Japan. It was the best performing stock of 2024. It's since down about 50% from the highs, but it seems to be sort of finding a water level. And at the meeting, Simon Garevich, the CEO, president of Metaplanet, laid out his plans for what comes next. But it was interesting to watch him speak with Eric Trump, to see the reaction from the audience. And I was just thinking to myself, after watching Eric Trump speak in Hong Kong and then watching him speak in Tokyo, there's this whole sort of look, like throwing down the gauntlet. Here's what we're doing in America. Here's who we're aligned with. We're speaking, right on the border of mainland China about Bitcoin and how the United States is embracing Bitcoin and how he's, deeply involved with companies, whether American BTC or World Liberty Financial. I don't think they touch Bitcoin, but Bitcoin/crypto space. And then doing this again in Japan, talking about how much he loves Simon Garevich. And this is all happening around the same time that I was just looking at some reports from the White House. The White House is also working on trade deals with Japan and things like that. So it just sort of seems kind of interesting that Eric Trump is out there doing this. I haven't seen a lot of commentary on this. Maybe it's just people not focusing on this or not putting those pieces together. I wonder how much of it was aligned. I wouldn't say it's like some grand um, conspiracy that they have Eric Trump out here doing this stuff, but I'm sure he's sort of briefed on what's happening back home, and sort of maybe what role he plays as someone who is a strategic advisor to Metaplanet, to someone who's obviously close with David Bailey and who supports the work he's doing. And it just seemed interesting to me. It's like I was thinking back. I'm like, is there any time in recent history where anything like this would have existed? Was there any president's child traveling around on sort of a business circuit talking about what America's doing, why the world is going to follow, et cetera? I mean, I'll pass that question to you, Julian. I mean, does anything come to mind when it comes to something like this?
Well, I think there are a couple of models for like this type of behavior or endeavor or
Yep.
enterprise from a family member of a head of state.
Hmm.
One is that it's kind of a vanity exercise, something for the children of the president to do with their
Yeah.
time. You're almost like a kind of a member of a royal family, you know, like Prince William being on charity boards and flying
Right.
around the world and speaking at different this type of thing, as in something to occupy the time of a
Right.
kind of quasi aristocracy.
Right.
And then there's another model, I suppose, which is this is almost it's an arm of the White House,
Hmm.
informal, unofficial, but kind of a part of the policy platform,
Yeah.
directly. And then maybe a bit of a spectrum between those two poles. I don't have any inside information, but I think based on everything we've seen, I think it's closer to the latter than the former, right?
Yeah. Yep.
It
Yeah. I
goes
think
without
it's.
again, goes without saying. I mean, the president himself is deeply involved here, and
Yep.
and maybe we can get into some of the things that Eric Trump has actually said at this meeting and others, because I think it points to it being, as you allude to having more of a perhaps direct bearing on U.S. and White House policy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there was some slight variations between the talk in Hong Kong and this one. This one in Hong Kong, it was a fireside chat with David Bailey, my boss, and then in Tokyo, it was a fireside chat with Simon, the CEO or the president of Metaplanet, and yeah. Um, he's talking about, Eric Trump's talking about all these other people. He's meeting with people around the world. You have my tweets up there. Sovereign wealth funds are buying major heads of state, people in other major sort of political families around the world, super interested. But I also think he was just, yeah, generally sort of saying, kind of shilling, saying like, but buying Bitcoin at $100,000, you're not, this was the deal of the century. I mean, that's kind of hard to, it's kind of hard to imagine. But if you do sort of believe we're early, as I do, and as apparently Eric Trump does, this might be the case. But yeah, I will say he wasn't like directly shilling his companies or anything like that. I mean, granted, he is an advisor, a strategic advisor to Metaplanet, so I guess on some level he was. But for the most part, he's talking about Bitcoin even as money. So I was kind of happy that Simon Garovich brought it up, but he talked about Eric Trump now accepting payment for some of the units in the buildings he's buying. So I guess some of the condos, the buildings he's building, accepting payment in Bitcoin. So quite interesting. We had Trump in the White House press room talk about de minimis exemptions up to $600 on Bitcoin. I followed up and asked that question in the press room myself. And now Eric Trump accepting it as payment, sending some signals out there into the world. I don't know to what benefit that would be to the United States, but it's interesting that at the same time, it's definitely sending a message that the United States is embracing this, which on some level, I would say furthers the game theory dynamic at play here. So if one of the major world powers, if the major world power is embracing this, sort of like next move is on you guys, sort of thing. That seemed to be the vibe at both of the talks he gave.
Yeah, well, I suppose to dig into the message here a little bit more, when Eric Trump is saying things like the banking institutions around the world are broken,
Yeah, it's heavy.
how seriously, is this kind of just Bitcoin shill speak, or should it? Do you think it should be taken a little bit more seriously, particularly by state actors, and is it being taken a little bit more seriously by state actors?
It's a very good question. So all I can think about when he says this stuff was I sat down and interviewed Eric at Bitcoin Mena last year, backstage 10-minute interview. I think it's on our YouTube channel. And I know maybe I'm sounding naive here, but I was genuinely like, I think he really believes all this. Like he spoke about it with enough. I interview multiple people every week. You get a sense of like when someone is just sort of touching on their talking points versus when it's personal to them, whether or not they've really studied this thing, whether they have some other relationship to it that I don't know, whether it feels sincere or not. And it does feel that way. It also kind of blows my mind that he's just so openly speaking about that, globally, the financial system being what it is. I think a lot of us know that. Is he maybe shilling to Bitcoiners? Like I would say maybe at Bitcoin Asia, but to say that in front of, you know, a group of people who are buying a securitized version of Bitcoin, who are engaging with at least a traditional financial system, if not, it's not necessarily the banking system, but traditional markets. I was sort of just like, maybe this guy just really believes. I don't know. Maybe, I'm not much of an analyst, I should say. I'm decent reporter, but I guess I was just sort of like I've been thinking a lot about what his incentives to speak like that are, what his reasons to speak like that are, and I haven't come to a firm conclusion just yet.
Yeah. Well, one thing that is striking, you alluded to this before we went live, is that not only is he saying these things, but at least last week, he's saying them in a very strategically important part of the world.
Yes.
And, one that is like bordering on China, right? That's what we're talking about here. So I find it hard to believe that there's no one sitting behind the scenes either advising or at least paying careful attention to a member of Trump's family saying stuff like this in a part of the world like this. But there's a lot of stuff that comes from Team Trump. It's hard to keep track of, I suppose, a lot of the time, and you never know. It might just be part of the kind of stream of, it's almost like kind of stream of consciousness type, like fire hose of information that comes from the White House. I don't know.
We try to figure out whether or not it's 4D chess, when in reality it's just sort of like, this is we're going here next, and it's you're sort of people are gonna I don't know. I think it's more of the latter, I think, for sure. But interesting, definitely interesting. Something that I don't see. The only reason I brought it up and led with it here is because I just don't feel like many people are commenting on this. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I've been traveling and kind of off a little bit, but I don't think there's many people who are sort of taking note of it. But again, like I thought back to myself, I was in China with the president's son talking about Bitcoin. I'm like, how is that not a bigger conversation? Topic. Quite interesting. Yeah.
It's like there's, this is a kind of cliched meme at this point. People have been saying it for a decade. But this idea of knowing when to take not just Donald Trump, but the Trumps, I suppose, seriously versus literally.
Right.
And I think people still haven't figured that out a lot of the time. Still
part of the strategy.
And it's no doubt cultivated from the Team Trump side as well. Okay, let's move on to another story, but same part of the world. Now, you were just in, as we mentioned, you were in Japan last week.
Yeah.
Here is another story from.
So, just so people know, also this story was posted a few weeks back or 2 months back or something, but apparently there's now sort of a plan to potentially accelerate this. So one of the main reasons that people say Bitcoin adoption hasn't happened much in Japan is because the capital gains rate on it is 55%. One of the reasons Metaplanet has done well there is because the security, it's been essentially the proxy ETF vehicle, and capital gains on Metaplanet are only 20%. So anybody who is looking for Bitcoin exposure, whether an institutional investor or just somebody who's looking to sort of, get more yen for their investment, using Metaplanet was a better proxy than using Bitcoin itself to get that price exposure. Based on some conversations I've had, Metaplanet. So I'll contextualize what I'm about to say. I lived in Japan for a year. I taught at a university there, so I have some understanding of the culture. And there is some truth to this idea of like the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, sort of thing. And this, I think, is I'm not going to speak about broader Asian culture, but that's my understanding. There's a little bit more of a sort of don't make too many waves, all this.
Right.
And Simon Garevich from Metaplanet is an interesting
Sticking up, so
character.
the nail that's sticking up as in drawing attention to yourself.
Attention,
Right.
correct,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly. So he's doing really well. I think the company's made billions of dollars, all this kind of stuff. It's been, at least on paper, through the share price. Um, so it looks like the government now is sort of taking more seriously. And again, this is based on some conversations I've had with those in the know there. Can't say who, but they're taking more seriously this idea of cutting the cap gains on Bitcoin down to 20% and also issuing a spot Bitcoin ETF there. And this is in sort of direct response to the success of Metaplanet, which would obviously detract from Metaplanet to some degree. But I actually find this really interesting because I also visited the Tokyo Bitcoin base, which is where they actually teach like grassroots Bitcoin adoption, what Bitcoin is, how to custody it, how to use it. The guy outside of the Tokyo Bitcoin base, there's a food truck that accepts Lightning. So it's much more like it's a bit of a different, it's not really thinking about Bitcoin as an investable asset, but about Bitcoin as peer to peer money, what it was intended to be. So in a really weird way, Metaplanet may be catalyzing m- more people to actually go over and get exposure to Bitcoin. I think there's going to end up being room for both. But it is interesting that sort of the Japanese government is paying attention and that they're sort of saying, okay, you're having all this success. Like, well, don't mind us. We're just going to be over here making it easier for people to get real Bitcoin, which I find interesting. It's sort of like a game theory happening within, well, not game theory, but like some sort of, I don't know, uh, competition afoot within Japan, when it comes to how people are getting their Bitcoin or Bitcoin exposure. Um, yeah, just was a small tidbit of information. Again, not many people paying attention to, but ideally, Japan, gets on board. Japan was once when Mount Gox existed. For those who don't know, that was the exchange that one of the first major Bitcoin exchanges. It operated. It was headquartered in Japan. It operated there from 2010 to early 2014 when it was hacked and the Bitcoin was stolen slash lost. Huge sort of dramatic thing. Apparently, many people in Japan have PTSD around Bitcoin because of this. Um, I don't fully, that's what I was told. I don't fully buy that because I think a lot of people have come into Bitcoin much later than 2014. But at the same time, that 55% capital gains tax rate, and also speaking with a member of my team at Bitcoin Magazine, Isabella from Get Based, she does Bitcoin Backstage as well. She said she spoke with them about like, hey, you're ready to like buy your cup of coffee with Bitcoin. And a lot of Japanese people were like, no, essentially the capital gains rate is too high and we're not just going to do it without paying the capital gains rate. So we could be seeing that dynamic shift. I think it's important to pay attention to those dynamics shifting in all G7 countries because I think each of them are sort of paying attention to what the other is doing and apparently to what companies within the country are doing. And I think that will end up having, it's sort of that race. I think globally, this will become more and more of a thing for like what's going to be the best jurisdiction to hold Bitcoin in. And I think it's a good thing that Japan becomes a little bit more competitive in this regard because, again, right now it's kind of looked at the securitized version of it via Metaplanet is sort of the way people there are thinking about it. When you have 120 million people in Japan that could otherwise be very much having somewhat of an impact on the Bitcoin market, and right now are sort of staying out of that, letting Metaplanet have all the fun. That could change soon.
So you've talked a little bit about, I guess the cultural side of Metaplanet in Japan, the kind of
Yep.
popularity of it. You see, as you mentioned earlier, thousands of people turning up to the shareholder meeting.
Yep.
How much of that is people being orange pilled, I suppose, versus Metaplanet being its own distinct thing, its own phenomenon,
Yep.
somewhat parallel, separate to Bitcoin as such?
I think because of Dylan LeClaire's involvement, I would argue that I think it's very much tied to Bitcoin, but also shout out to Metaplanet for this. Metaplanet, that team is actually sort of helping out with the publication of Bitcoin Magazine, the physical issue, in Japan in Japanese. So we actually have that's the first language that we actually have a team working on translating our information into. And Bitcoin Magazine, for any readers who don't know, is far more focused on, I think, more cypherpunk issues. We just did a lightning issue. We've done a mining issue. It's very much not necessarily like paper Bitcoin, it's a paper magazine, but it's not about paper Bitcoin. That being said, the next issue will vary a little bit. But yeah, no, I think that Metaplanet, they're also looking to create a physical space with the hotel that they own for Bitcoin people to hang out, which is cool. I know that the team from Tokyo Bitcoin Base has been in touch with Simon and Dylan, trying to get them a little bit more involved in grassroots Bitcoin adoption in the country. So there's stuff happening. There's and I mean, and Simon himself asked Eric Trump, like, when do we start talking about Bitcoin as a medium of exchange? So I think that they're subtly trying to introduce Bitcoin to people, but there's no question that people are not buying Metaplanet because they own one hotel, an okay hotel in Japan. They're
Right.
buying it because it's a Bitcoin ETF proxy, or it's a Bitcoin price exposure proxy. And I think that it's done a good thing. It's done good for them to sort of legitimize Bitcoin as an asset. I hope the next step is for to see Japanese people sort of feel more comfortable holding Bitcoin itself. It looks like things are moving in that direction now, in part because of Metaplanet.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, let's turn our attention stateside.
Yep.
As I once again resize my little window here, but the Small Business Administration, I believe
SBA. Yep.
SBA has issued some new guidance, or I don't know if it's official guidance, but it's kind of a press release of sorts.
Yep.
That was precipitated by the executive order from the White House from a few weeks back on debanking. And what they have basically, there was a requirement, like that, the EO from Trump said a bunch of things, including directing the SBA and some other agencies to, I don't know, clean up their act, basically implement a bunch of practices that are going to bring debanking to an end in one way or another, and also kind of make restitution for it in some ways.
Okay.
So the SBA last week has ordered lenders around the country to end a bunch of debanking practices. Here's what's interesting when you get into the fine print. So not only is it this, like we've seen this, we talked about the Fed talking about debanking last week and ending it, and there's been a lot of high-level talk around what it means to kind of end this focus on, they call it reputational risk and political-based debanking. But there's another side to it too, which is what do you do with the people who have already suffered through this over the past few years? And so we've got some of the answer to that now. So pursuant to this executive order, the SBA's letter has required lenders to take a bunch of actions, including, so they have to identify any past practices, formal or informal policies that influence their decisions to debank people. They have to make reasonable efforts to identify and then reinstate those clients. So if you had kicked someone, Bank of America had kicked people off its services, they have to kind of go and make good, find those folks and offer them the services back. So this is interesting. It's we've been talking about the kind of messy nature of this debanking concept and Operation Choke Point 2.0 for a few weeks. This looks like the most practical, tactical application of this new policy that I've seen. Just how are we actually going to make good on this to folks who were affected by it. So,
good to see.
Cool to see.
Yeah, good to see this addressed in such detail. I know we're not here to be banking enthusiasts, but the reality is we still live in a majority fiat world, and people still need bank accounts. So good to see this being remedied, not only looked at but remedied, and also I think some reparations, if you will, are in order for those who were affected.
Yes, not banking enthusiasts, but freedom enthusiasts, I suppose.
That's right. Exactly. That's it.
To the extent that they overlap. Okay, so speaking of staying in the banking world, Caitlin Long, who I feel like at this point this show is just almost a kind of Caitlin Long timeline.
Let's get her on here. Let's get her on to talk through some stuff sometime.
Yeah. So she had an interesting thread on X this week talking about the more political undertones that kind of run underneath this discussion of what's happening with the makeup of the Fed. Specifically, is Jerome Powell going to be fired? What's going to happen to him? And kind of tying into the Lisa Cook story and other things too. All as it relates to this battle between essentially Donald Trump and the Fed about lowering rates, right? So I guess the TLDR of this thread is, she's got the screenshot here from Polymarket showing the 7% chance of Jerome Powell being fired by the end of the year. And I suppose the thrust of her argument is that she thinks it's probably, or it could be higher than that, for a variety of reasons. But it's a fascinating thread. I suggest people go and read it. Basically, what Caitlin talks about, which, to an outside observer, even to a kind of keen observer, it's hard to get a sense of not only the fact that this is an issue, but the extent to which it is, but it's the actual political makeup of the board or the different committees and board itself of the Fed. So Caitlin talks about it, the actual kind of Democrat versus Republican breakdown, and in terms of the number of seats, specifically on, I think, the FOMC, the Federal Open Market Committee, and basically I'll find where she's talked about it. So the idea here is there's a 7-member board of governors. That's what it is. And right now there are 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans. And so Caitlin's saying that Trump really is trying to flip 2 of these seats. One of them being the Lisa Cook seat, and the other one, I think there's a resignation of someone on the board already kind of in process. So just an interesting wrinkle to this debate that, in at least in the framing here, this is like an explicitly political framing, in a way that you don't often see the Fed discussed. I suppose we talk about the norms of the Fed and how it's, mostly seen as an apolitical, independent organization. But this is a very different point of view. This is saying, no, this is an organization made up of Republicans, Democrats, and this is kind of pivotal battle going on about how that makeup is going to be going forward.
Yeah. Caitlin, leave it to Caitlin to break down all things Fed and to do so very, very well. I think her getting her banking license rejected by the Fed, so she applied for a Fed master license. I think it just sort of left her with like I wouldn't say a permanent sort of taste for revenge, but like a permanent, very, very critical of all things Fed. She's the best for this stuff for those who don't follow.
I'm just trying to find, actually, it was from last week, but she had a reaction to that SBA order as well, which was here we go.
No,
you can see how passionate she is about this issue, right?
Max sirens.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 sirens, maybe. She is very aware of this kind of political undercurrent. As we've talked about before, has experienced a lot of it firsthand. So I guess let's move on now to talk about a subject that's been dormant for a few weeks. But is screaming back to life, which is the Clarity Act coming back. As Congress gets back from their summer vacations, and everyone gets seated again in DC, we're expecting some action here. On a number of different fronts. There was a clip here from French Hill. On Fox Business the other day, basically saying, hoping that the Senate is kind of going to pick up the baton of the Clarity Act and do what they need to do to kind of secure Democrat support and kind of get it passed. So I guess let's get ready for this to crack on a little bit. Everyone's kind of impatiently awaiting on clarity to get going as well. But any insight from you or anything recently that you might have on what are the kind of sticking points, what are the big issues, and anything we should expect to see in the next few weeks?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Eleanor Terrett. She's really, really on top of this. I think she's pretty close with French Hill's team too. I will be doing my best to stay on top of this as well. So the two main things I think people are looking for when it comes to clarity. So the first one, protections for software developers under Section 1960, which is unlicensed money transmission. So basically saying that anyone creating non-controlling, that's the language they use in the bill, non-custodial technology or purveying that technology is not responsible for money transmission. That's the number one thing that we're paying attention to. Obviously, this speaks to what just happened with the Tornado Cash and Samurai cases, and then also establishing, I guess, a clear framework between securities and commodities, which constitutes a security, which constitutes a commodity, and then I think there'll be some language around safe harbor there. So some of these assets, maybe in the eyes of the SEC, well, in the eyes of the regulators, maybe start off as securities and then become commodities. We've seen a lot of we've seen actual court rulings about this kind of stuff. Like, for example, I think with the Ripple case, they actually said, it started out as a security when they did their IPO, but then it kind of became a commodity. Again, this is broader than Bitcoin, but this is just what's going to be fought over in the Clarity Act. As far as it pertains to Bitcoin, what I think most Bitcoiners should be paying attention to is obviously protection for software developers. This will include wallet manufacturers, wallet makers, all this stuff. And I'm excited. I think that even with what happened, I think 3 weeks ago now, with Lola looking into potentially Google. We never really found out for sure, but whether or not Google was actually going to delist, I don't know, non-custodial wallets in their store. We just want to see all this kind of stuff stop and have people creating non-custodial tech stop feeling nervous around whether or not they're going to go to jail for it, whether they'll be listed because of what they be delisted because of whatever it is. We just want this tech to be protected. And as of right now, the language from the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act that was put into the Clarity Act is going to be ideally the language that protects these developers. I would just say also, so the Senate Banking Committee is working on one draft of this, and I believe there's also a second draft being prepared by the Senate Agriculture Committee. So I'm not sure what reconciliation will look like and how much those drafts will differ from what passed in the House, but these are the things that we'll be paying attention to moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary. I guess a couple of things there. So my understanding is that the Senate Banking Committee and Agriculture Committee drafts are kind of two different portions of the Clarity Act.
Got it.
Banking being the kind of SEC related part, and agriculture being the commodities, CFTC part. And so
Understood.
I think the discussion draft that came out from the Banking Committee a few weeks ago, or prior to the recess, was incomplete in that sense.
Okay.
It was
understood.
This is how the SEC side of it is going to work. Then the two will be merged. But of course, I suppose a couple of issues there, which we've touched on. Certainly, regular viewers of Capital Gains will have heard us talk about this before. But the draft that we do have for the Clarity Act so far in the Senate differs materially from what was passed in the House. Again, this is the kind of distinction between the House's version for determining what commodities and securities are. They had this test, which was a maturity test, called, in inverted commas, maturity. So the question is, how mature is the blockchain, the token, and in other words, how decentralized is it? And so, depending on if it's really decentralized, great, commodity in the CFTC world. If it's not, security, SEC. That was the House. The Senate Banking Committee has come up with or are applying a different test, which has nothing to do with figuring out how decentralized something is, but is more just looking at which rights are conferred on the holders of certain assets. Do they give you certain rights, and things flow on from there. So there will be some meaningful reconciliation that has to happen one way or another between House and Senate versions.
Yep.
Not only on that question, but of course on the developer protections, which, as we discussed last week, there has been potentially some I guess, murmurings behind the scenes that Democrats might want to water that language down or remove it.
That's correct.
So,
yeah.
And then there was, last week we talked about the letter from the DeFi Education Fund. signed by, I don't know, 100 different members of the broader crypto industry,
Yep.
essentially saying none of us are going to continue to support this legislation if it doesn't include these protections. So
Yeah.
it was good to see that, but also concerning that there seems to be that looming threat, which will have
Yeah.
to be hashed out over the next few weeks.
I think it's also, this is a bit more of like, this is the part of the Overton window that I guess hasn't shifted, but I'm actually very optimistic. I think people raising their voices makes a real difference. Obviously, a letter signed by 112, I think, in total advocates, crypto industry advocates, people, all this kind of stuff, makes a big difference. And I think, yeah, people are voices are being heard, and yeah, I'm optimistic, and I think. It's just with all this stuff, it's like people don't know it's important until people, those in power don't really know how important it is to us until we speak up, and people are speaking
Yep.
up. So yeah, we'll see what happens.
Well, speaking of power to the people, some other interesting news is so Alex Brusewitz, who I believe is an advisor to the president in some shape or form,
Mm,
has posted that the no tax on, or the tax exemption for tips, could potentially also apply to digital content creators. So this is quite interesting, I mean, for a number of reasons, but I guess any takes from you initially, and on maybe how this could be, I don't know, reconciled with some of the other discussions we've seen on, de minimis
yep.
tax exemptions for Bitcoin spending.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start by saying, like, I wasn't a big fan of the one big beautiful bill, for a number of reasons. I mean, I would have been happy to see stuff that I liked included in it, like de minimis exemptions for Bitcoin spending. So I sort of, I ended up sharing this. I took a screenshot of this and shared it on Nostr, saying, like, let the golden age of Nostr begin. So those who aren't on Nostr, it allows you to zap people, which is to send them sats over Lightning for their content. I don't think many people on Nostr, all, I don't know, 40 to 50,000 active weekly users, are proactively reporting their Nostr zaps, partially because it's just the funds aren't that high. But eventually, I do believe we live in a world where people zapping each other Bitcoin is just a far more common occurrence. So I think this lays the groundwork for something cool. I hadn't, it's interesting. When I think of tips, I used to be a waiter, so I think just tips, like that's what I'm used to. Someone, hey, great service, here you go. Hadn't really thought about it from the value for value lens. So that's the way people think about things on Nostr. You provided me this post, it was valuable to me, I'm going to pay you some Bitcoin for it. But I think it was one of my most popular Nostr posts ever. It's got, I made myself $13 in Bitcoin from Zaps on that post. So yeah, I got
Well, the home of Zaps is excited
that's
about
it.
Zaps.
Exactly. So I know Marty and Odell Marty Bent and Odell were talking about this. I think it's cool. I think it's cool. I guess what was surprising to me is I didn't know you could sort of, so that document that was screenshotted in the bottom of the tweet that you have there is actually from the Treasury. So there's if you Google Treasury, no tax on tips, it should come up pretty quickly. So that's a screenshot from that document. And this apparently is Bessent saying, no, we said it, we want Main Street to benefit, the way Wall Street has benefited all these years, we want Main Street to benefit as well. I guess they assume people making tips as content creators, waiters, whoever else. There's a bunch of different categories, as you could see from the document. That's just a screenshot, and it has 6 categories right there. It's great. I think the weird part is you do have to, I think, report them, but you just don't have. I think it's upwards of like $25,000 in tips you wouldn't have to pay on. Interesting. I have this weird feeling that a lot of people are going to start figuring out different ways to classify some of their income as tips.
As soon as the wheels start turning and you think, hang on a second. I mean, firstly, a lot of these streamers, like, it's their the bigger ones, I suppose,
source of income. Yeah,
right?
totally.
It's not a tip in the classical sense that it's understood as maybe a supplementary thing. It's
right.
Like that's how I make my money.
Well, I think some of it is, though. I think some of it is like, well, it's hard. I don't know. I know there are ways to maybe have like a link tree where you could say, hey, if you want to support the show, you could drop some money here. I don't know how that gets classified. I have a strange feeling that if you have a pretty decent accountant, you could probably make a good case for that and get away with not paying some of that. For other content creators who just have advertisers on their show or whatever, totally different story. That's, you're going to have to pay money on that. That's just, I think, going to be straight up income. And I can't imagine we're going to start calling revenue from advertisers tips. But yeah, for everybody else who's making some money doing this, by posting their stuff, I recommend to anybody, get on Nostr, download Primal, especially when I'm covering things. Like when I covered the Tornado Cash stuff, I made at least a few $100s in Bitcoin from tips, half of which
Frank,
I will be.
What are we doing? Why are we not? We need a tip
We got.
show. We're live
We need
right
to,
now, man. Come on.
I've said this on Nostr before. We do need to figure out, it's Nostr Nests. I forget what it is, but we got to get this streaming on Nostr as well. I will work with our team on that. But yeah, we got to get those. We need some sats over here at Capital Gains. These segments aren't producing themselves,
Right.
and
Everyone else is experiencing the gains, but us.
That's it. We're just reporting on them. We're just here reporting on them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, I also used to be a waiter in another life, but of course this is in Australia, so there was there's very little tipping.
Yeah.
Of course, wait staff earn a living wage there. This is another debate for another time.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's move on to a slightly more serious subject. This is not a huge story, but I'm not even going to bother trying to resize this one. People can just kind of get the gist of it. So this isn't a new bill, but it did come up on, I got an alert because there was an update for it. There's a bill in Wisconsin that is currently making its way through the assembly, and this is a kind of this is technical and maybe dry, but I wanted to highlight it for several reasons. What the bill concerns is tax exemptions for data centers, and it's ostensibly a pro-business bill. This is a Republican-sponsored, tax exemption bill. This is like saying we're going to reduce taxes on a number of different data centers. However, there's one quirky part of this, which is that it exempts, does not apply to anyone using with kind of, what do they call it? Cryptocurrency facilities used to process and verify and secure crypto transactions. Miners, in other words. So what this is a bunch of types of data centers are all going to get tax exemptions, except for Bitcoin miners, for example. So in a way, it's this is a bill that discriminates against Bitcoin miners for no obvious reason, I suppose, to me. And again, this is a Republican-sponsored bill. So, why highlight it? Well, on the one hand, you would say it's unfortunate and it's going to make it, maybe comparatively, less attractive to do business in Wisconsin. It's also a strange bill, and you never know why these types of exemptions get thrown into pieces of legislation, right? One person has the idea in a drafting committee, and then the language gets in there somehow. But I guess that why I also wanted to highlight it was to show that it's often hard to pass the details of legislation. It's like a general point.
Okay.
One of the things I'm trying to do with Bitcoin laws, for example, is to make it easy to say, all right, these are maybe good bills and bad bills, and if there's a partisan element to it, it's like this. Republicans are sponsoring these great bills and Democrats are sponsoring these bad ones, or vice versa.
Right.
But I guess it's complex, and so I don't know. Maybe this is me just whining about how hard it is for me to figure this stuff out. But I guess folks in Wisconsin maybe pay attention to this, and I don't know. I'm a little bit perplexed by it. I don't know why it doesn't make sense to me at all. Why you would just have this kind of carve out, almost discriminatory thing applied to Bitcoin miners. So hopefully it doesn't kind of get passed in this form. But there you go.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I have seen some I'm not going to comment too much on this, but I have seen some comparable things with power agencies. It's a power cooperative based out in the Dakotas and some of the surrounding states out there. I don't know if this is just sort of, I don't know if there's a technical reason, meaning like maybe they buy electricity load in bulk, and that does something to the power grid's balance sheet, or if it's just some sort of, we don't like this Bitcoin stuff, and we don't understand this Bitcoin stuff. I haven't fully parsed out what the impetus is for these for this sort of language.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I guess there's call for input from anybody that's in Wisconsin and has a little bit more insight. Otherwise, I'll be looking into it more to try and get some answers too. Maybe some of the committee discussion will be a little bit more enlightening. But there you go. Okay, so just a couple of stories left on the run sheet. This is one of them. We're talking about Dennis Porter announcing a decentralization defense fund, raising $100,000 for the development of knots. So we haven't talked about this on the show before. Do you want to attempt to give kind of a there's a lot of context here, but maybe a quick TLDR on just what knots is, and then we can talk about what this fund does too.
Yeah, of course. So it's a quick thing. So Bitcoin is a protocol. To engage with that protocol, you need a client. The main client that people use is Bitcoin Core. Knots is, I think the best way to say it, a version of Bitcoin Core that is maintained by one developer predominantly. I think there may be one or two other people helping him, but that's Luke Dash Jr. But Luke Dash Jr. and the likes of Mechanic and some other people in the space, well, a lot of people in the space, don't like what they term spam being on the Bitcoin blockchain. So spam, in the way that they define it, is the JPEGs, the ordinals, the inscriptions, all this kind of stuff that end up in Bitcoin blocks. By definition, it is not spam. So if you're paying a fee for something, it's not spam. That's literally what prevents spam, is the fact that it costs money. But that's how they term it. Okay, and I really don't have much of an issue with that. If you don't like it, you don't like it. That's fine. But in reality, so they've created knots, which basically is an implementation of Core that filters for this. That basically filters out non-monetary transactions. I don't know the technical details of how they do that. But the problem here is that it also, in some ways, and please, I'm not a super specialist on this level, but it does cause potential issues with the relaying of information via the nodes. So if you want to run knots
by design, right?
By design. So what you're doing is potentially, if you're running knots, and again, like, I'm not here to judge. That's not what I'm getting to here. I'm personally, like, I run Core. I'm a Core supporter, and I support what they've done, but also because, like, knots wouldn't exist without Core. So I don't get, I don't fully get the argument of, like, Bitcoin Core developers are evil. It's like, well, all knots is like a version that slightly alters the current versions of Core. So it's sort of like, if you created your own client, your own implementation, then I would say, like, knock yourself out. Like, everybody has the right to write their own software, but it's sort of like you're taking the software you hate and making it better, quote unquote. But this can affect relay policy, which could affect the way information is relayed around the Bitcoin network, that does threaten, I guess, decentralization, and which equates to security on certain levels. But people really just don't like the quote unquote spam. I didn't know Dennis Porter was that passionate about this. I came across this randomly this week as I was scrolling, and I'm a little bit, I don't know. I've had a conversation with Jameson Lopp about this. He's like, there's nothing to be concerned about here. Not necessarily Dennis Porter's actions, but he does it. Knots has been around for quite some time. It's gaining traction right now because, as I said, Luke Dash Jr., Mechanic, other people seem to be on sort of like a crusade to get people to believe that Core developers are evil and everything else. I'm not, again, don't take this as me weighing in, but I find it interesting that we're now raising money for this. It's an issue. If you follow Shinobi or Mr. Hodl or some other people who have been speaking about this, they know more than I do. They're very much biased towards Core, but I think they're biased towards it because they really believe that it makes the network more secure and that knots potentially compromises the network security. But now we have Dennis Porter, who's a main sort of, I guess, a figure in the political space for sure. I'm not sure if his role, he's not a lobbyist. I guess just, I'm not even sure what that. Advocacy. Satoshi Action Fund, an advocate in the Bitcoin space and in the political realm. He's all about knots. I think he tweeted something else about Kale, who's the guy who's working on eCash on Lightning right now. Kale, I think, has also contributed to Bitcoin Core. I might be wrong about that, but he's definitely a supporter of Core. And this is someone who Kale doesn't even care about ordinals or any of that stuff. He just believes that in his mind, the fees are the filters. So essentially, if you can afford to put something into a Bitcoin block, then great. And Adam Back believes this. A lot of prominent people in the space believe it, but it's becoming a bigger issue. Now we have political people like Dennis Porter getting involved. I guess the reason I flagged this is sort of like, I don't know whether he's going to start. I can't see how politicians would get involved with this. I'm not really even sure why he's involved, but it does make me a bit sad that this is what we're focusing on. Kind of, I would call this sort of fighting each other when we could be, very much uniting and working to see, better language in our legislation or whatever. But this is where we're at. Worth noting, is what it is.
Yeah. So what's interesting about it to me, I'm not an expert in it by any means, and I don't have strong views. And partly it's because I see it as, there are technical arguments that are kind of beyond my level of understanding. But maybe there's an interesting thing to talk about here, which is if you are a Bitcoiner and you are trying to pay attention to debates like this, how do you try and inform yourself in a reliable way?
Yeah.
This applies not just to I suppose this core versus not question, but other technical issues on Bitcoin. If you're a Bitcoiner, it's like it's always in your interests, I suppose, to be to be understanding the technology as much as you can. Now, if you're not an engineer, there are limits to your, I suppose, capacity to do that, and so you inevitably have to rely on other things, finding people to trust, finding explanations of technical concepts that are reliable and digestible.
Yep.
So I haven't been involved in really any debate here, and I haven't formed a strong view on it. I suppose this is a purely personal thing, but as a kind of a heuristic for me, when I see debates like this, one thing that just turns me off on a personal level is kind of moralizing, like excessive moral framings of what seem to be technical questions.
Yep.
There's a kind of an infamous clip from the 2018, 17-18 block size wars of Roger Ver, and Roger Ver is, I don't know, he's making some, it may be a little bit unfair to take this tiny little clip out of what I'm sure is a much larger context, but I think he was almost in tears or like very emotional about, starving children in the third world not being able to afford to make Bitcoin payments because the fees are too high, because the blocks are too small and other things. And it's, I think, part of the reason, and I raised that as an example of, I think part of people kind of joked about that because it had this highly emotionally charged moralistic framing.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know, it's a personal thing. I just find it hard to, I'm kind of turned off by it. And so when folks, I see some of that coming into this knots versus core debate where people are evil and they're spammers and they're scammers and they're attacking, this is an attack on Bitcoin, and I don't know. Like I said, as someone who ostensibly is trying to find neutral ground and trying to find reliable information as mostly a non-technical person, I guess I'll just say that type of argumentation doesn't work on me. And in fact, I almost start by default moving myself to the other side when I hear that language.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great takeaway. I don't know. I think podcasters, I know Danny Knowles has had the likes of Shinobi on, Shinobi being a huge proponent of core and mechanic on, but not together. And I know some other people like Robin Sayre were looking to try to have debates on their podcast. I think the bigger issue here is that things are sort of so broken, like those relationships are so broken that I'm not even sure there will be arguments in good faith if people did actually get on these podcasts. It's just at this point kind of a lot of sort of sticking to the talking points, the propaganda around why you believe what you believe, whether it's logical or not. And then, I don't know. I mean, all I would say is that for people who are confused, some things to understand. Knots is not a completely different implementation. It is a version of Bitcoin Core. Um, uh, when you might hear people talking about these filters or whatever, but this whole idea of Bitcoin having 4 MB blocks. Yeah. So Adam Back I think he's probably one of the best people to sort of weigh in on this. Not that he's doing like guest posts anywhere. He's just sort of commenting on Twitter. But I think, when Adam Back says something, especially in a technical sense about what's happening here, generally speaking, he's pretty kind about it. He doesn't get too snarky or anything, but he's also Adam Back. I mean, the man is cited in the Bitcoin white paper. Like, I would take what he says pretty seriously. I'm not telling you to take he's on the side of Core. But he has
say, I don't know if you've read this thread from him that I think he posted last night. I had a chance to skim it. I recommend obviously people go and read it because it's Adam. If for no other reason, it's Adam Back. But I think he is an interesting thread because I think perhaps clarifies his stance a little bit more than maybe it had been prior. And I think my quick read on it was he actually kind of comes down on the side of saying, yes, there is some spammy element here to inscriptions that should be dealt with in some way. So, and again, I'm not going to become like Twitter analyst in this as if that's some sort of arbiter on truth. But I did take like a quick note that there were some Nazi people. For example, Dennis Porter, who were kind of, I guess, happy with the tone that Adam Back is taking in this thread. So all that is to say, I think it's quite a balanced, reasonable take, and does a great job of putting some of the technical considerations into plain English language. So not that
I think the best
word, but
I think what most people think. Lynn Alden has had a good take on this. I think she called inscriptions sort of like graffiti, and she's like, most people don't like graffiti, but it exists and it just is a thing. So it's sort of like, when the chain is being used more, it'll probably be priced out. But right now we're seeing a lot of empty blocks, which makes me think, it's like, well, at least the chain's being used for something. I'm pretty indifferent. I don't own any ordinals. I'm not really here for that, but kind of indifferent in this regard. But good to see Adam Back weigh in.
It would be the problem would feel more acute, perhaps, or relevant if there was like excessive demand for block space, which there just hasn't been for like 18 months, So that's probably the biggest, my overriding concern. As you said, it's like, why are we spending time on this? But hey, I guess people, I'm not a core developer or an ops developer or any kind of developer, so have to be humble about how much I can reasonably contribute to analysis.
Totally.
Last thing on the docket, had an announcement from Galaxy. So Galaxy has launched tokenized SEC registered shares on public blockchains. So this is somewhat breaking new ground. I don't know if you had a chance to chat to Alex, but any kind of thoughts on this news and the significance of it?
Yeah, I think I put this on the agenda and I was pumped. So this really doesn't have anything directly to do with Bitcoin, but it can. So this is, I think they tokenized and put this on Solana, if I'm not mistaken. So great. You want to buy some Galaxy stock? Again, it's kind of like a stable coin in that there is an analog version of this. What you're buying is not the native version of the stock, but a crypto version of a thing. Same way when you buy a stable coin, you're buying a crypto version of a dollar that's in a bank account somewhere. So you're buying here a stock certificate that's sitting in a brokerage somewhere, or with some sort of custodian. The reason I think this is interesting is because I do have my reservations, to put it nicely, around Bitcoin treasury companies and this idea of like all this Bitcoin being held in vehicles that is traded via closed walled gardens. I don't like that. So I think the reason I brought this up is what I think would be interesting. And again, it's not necessarily my cup of tea, but what might be interesting is if so there's some Bitcoin layer 2s, like even Blockstream. There's securities on the Blockstream. I'm sorry, Liquid. My apologies. They I think they tokenize hash rate contracts. I forget what it is, but you could buy certain hash rate contracts on Liquid. But you have Botanics, who brought over the Ethereum virtual machine to a Bitcoin layer 2. So for those who don't understand that, you're actually using Bitcoin on Ethereum, which sounds like a little kind of weird. So ETH is technically different, or Ether is different from Ethereum. But to my point, let's say MicroStrategy or Strategy or Naka decided to tokenize their stock. It would be cool, in my opinion, if that stock traded on a Bitcoin layer 2, and then we were using Bitcoin for the actual gas fees to trade that stock. I think that would make me happier than seeing all of this stuff traded in walled gardens. It feels a bit antithetical to the purpose of Bitcoin. So if we are moving in this direction, my I guess my call to action for anyone who might be listening is like, who's going to be the first treasury company to put their stock on a Bitcoin layer 2? That would be something, again, that we can use Bitcoin as the actual money to trade this stock or to pay the fees for the transaction. I think that would be a cool thing. I'm not sure what your thoughts on this is. You think this is something kind of groundbreaking or what?
Look, I agree. I think Bitcoin finance should run on Bitcoin, and very supportive of things that can make that happen. And great for Galaxy. Happy with those guys too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, I think that brings us pretty much to the end of capital gains. I guess before we head off, anything you're excited about for the next 7 days? Anything to watch out for? Any stories coming down the pipe that folks should be aware of?
It's a good one. Actually, let's say if you're listening, if there's something we should be paying attention to, please drop it in the comments. Obviously, please hit a like and subscribe button as well. But yeah, I'm just getting my bearings back about me, to be honest. Tomorrow morning, I flew in last night. I got home at 2 a.m. about 9 hours ago, slept for a few hours, and tomorrow morning I'm running a triathlon. So my brain is my brain is not fully on what's happening next. But yeah, paying attention to market structure. Probably going to be reaching out to French Hill's team, hoping to speak with him. Also, something to keep in mind. There's going to be some action happening around the Tornado Cash trial that I'll be paying attention to. So I think we're going to find out soon whether or not the government wants to retry the two counts on which the jury was hung. So the first count, which was the money laundering count, and then the other one, which was the sanctions violation count. We're going to hear more about that, and I'm hoping to speak with Jake Cervinsky about that to get a little bit more insight as to what we might expect. I don't know whether we'll be getting information about the money transmission charge for which Storm was found guilty, whether or not they're going to be moving that to the appellate courts anytime soon. But looking into that, I should say. Other than that, I don't know. What are you looking forward to?
Yeah, well, looking forward to. I don't know if it's actually this week that Congress starts sitting again.
Yep.
But obviously, looking forward to some progress on clarity and other things when that happens.
Yep.
And some of the state legislatures too. Believe it or not, there are still some SBR bills floating around.
Is that right?
I would love to see some progress on in Michigan and Massachusetts, and Ohio as well. So. These states have a few more months until the end of the year, but which is actually not that far away. So we will see if anything happens on SBRs, but there are still some kind of glimmers out there. You never know.
It's kind of crazy. I feel like when Bitcoin laws started, that was like the majority of what you were publishing. Did this state launch some sort of SBR bill or whatever, and that really did sort of trail off, huh? That really.
Yeah. Well, I think they all kind of just happened at the start of the year, right? So the session starts. Most of the bills are introduced within the first couple of months of the year,
right.
And then so many of the states actually are, they're done. They adjourn halfway through the year. The folks, senators and members of the House are kind of part-time people with lives to go off and get back to. So the back half of the year, I think the way that it works is the back half of the year is then kind of drafting and prepping for next year.
Okay.
So for a lot of the kind of annual legislature, so there's kind of an off season and an on season. So
we're all learning here.
In a couple of months, we're all learning.
Yeah. Julian's teaching me on the fly here. I'm moving over. Only doing this political reporting job now for about 8 months or so. So yeah, still learning. Didn't quite know that, but yes, I do remember finding out how little a lot of these politicians at the state level are paid after speaking with Representative Almond from New Hampshire, who was one of the people who helped get the SBR established there. So yeah, it's that's it. Like I said, That's it. Civics lessons galore here, ladies and
Yeah.
gentlemen. Learning about civics via Bitcoin. It's good stuff.
Yes, you're all very welcome.
Yeah. And next time you could tip us on Nostra, we'll try to figure that out this week. That'll be our homework.
Think about how much that was worth in SAT.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's right.
Cool. All right. Well,
Cool.
Everybody, once again, thanks for tuning in to Capital Gains. Frank and I will be back here same time next week. Frank, thank you as always.
Thank you,
and
sir.
until then, bye for now.
That's it. Peace, everybody.